Hello everyone, this is Chelsea with my third presentation on the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. So some of the objectives I will be covering are patterns of overexploitation, overexploited resources, species level conservation, especially with the queen conch, and site level conservation and how marine zoning applies to this. Humans have a history of overexploiting prey populations dating back to prehistoric times. Humans have caused many extinctions by spreading to parts of the world that had never been inhabited by humans before. There's also been a pattern of a rise of sport hunting, and a great example of this is with the great auk. This bird became extinct in the 1800s due to being overexploited for its meat and feathers. These patterns of overexploitation aren't only seen in animals, but also in plant life. Deforestation is a pattern that causes a lot of extinction. Even today, overexploitation is happening and more species are going extinct. Even though there are all of these negative effects of overexploitation, that doesn't mean that using resources can't be done in a way that promotes conservation. Consumptive users are really instrumental for conservation because they raise the value of wildlife, which fuels conservation. They raise the value of wildlife by assigning a social, cultural, or economic value to resources. And when people give value to these species, this causes people to have a reason to support conservation because they want to continue being able to use these species. A resource that is really overexploited are fish. Overfishing can cause damage to marine ecosystems and altering ecosystem structure. When fishing, many people aim to capture the largest fish because they're the most profitable and because they meet minimum size limits. By capturing these large fish, fishing down occurs. This pattern in overfishing leads to depletion of apex predators and a decrease in total biomass over time. The cascading effects of decreasing population sizes of predator fish include an increase in herbivorous fish species, which can cause a decrease in plant biomass because there are no predators to keep herbivorous species in check. And this really just throws off the balance of the ecosystem. Overexploitation of fish resources is a problem in the Florida Keys. And fishing down has also become an issue. Lately, the Florida Keys is seeing a smaller diversity of species, and the fish that they're catching are decreasing in size. In the waters surrounding Florida, fishing is a large industry which plays an important part in Florida's economy. In South Florida, commercial fishing is the fourth largest industry. Hogfish are an important fish in the Florida marine ecosystem, as well as in the Florida economy, and these fish have been overfished. To address this, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has lowered the bag limit of hogfish, set a recreational harvest season, and increased the minimum size limit with the hopes that these measures will help to rebuild the stock. By increasing the minimum size limit, this allows for the biomass of fish populations to increase over time and lessen the effects of fishing down. Because fishing is such a large part of the Florida economy, many people have made conservation of fish stocks more of a priority in order to secure more economic security. This is a great example of how consumptive users are important for conservation, as I mentioned earlier. People who depend on these fisheries economically are motivated to implement conservation so that they can continue to profit and maintain their business. So, moving on to species level conservation. This is conservation that focuses on each individual species and the status of that species. So rather than taking into account an entire ecosystem, species level conservation addresses one species at a time. The goal of species level conservation is to prevent the extinction of that species. The status of each species and its level of vulnerability is measured through the IUCN's Red List. On this list, categories of risk are varied from least concern to extinct. And by evaluating each species this way, we're able to see what species are at greater risk and prioritize conservation of those species. An example of species-level conservation in the Florida Keys is with the queen conch. The IUCN does not have enough data to classify the protected status of the species, but it does recognize a decrease in population size over time. Queen conch are protected in Florida through the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission because this conservation commission recognizes queen conch as threatened within the Florida Keys. A decrease in population of queen conch is due to harvesting pressure as well as water quality because queen conch are very sensitive to water quality and they're even used as an indicator species to determine what the water quality is. So conservation planning for the queen conch combines continuous tracking of queen conch populations, investing more energy into research into what the limiting factors of reproduction and survival are, and a ban on harvesting, as well as marine zoning, which I'll talk a little bit about later. The Conch Reef Sanctuary Preservation Area is one of these marine zones that prohibits activities that could be harmful to queen conch, like fishing, anchoring, and discharging pollution. So on a larger scale, there's site-level conservation. And this is conservation that focuses on prevention of habitat destruction in order to maintain biodiversity. Because habitat destruction is a large cause of a loss of biodiversity, focusing on habitat destruction of one site can be really effective at preventing a loss of biodiversity. With this approach, conservation of species do not have to happen one at a time, and many different species can be addressed at once. A big idea behind site-level conservation is that habitat is the most important thing in conservation of other species. So by focusing on conserving habitats, many species will benefit. And the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary really embodies the ideas of site-level conservation. The purpose of the sanctuary is to provide protected habitat in order to conserve species, especially threatened or endangered species. The marine sanctuary is home to a variety of different threatened and endangered species, like corals, seagrass, sea turtles, manatees, egrets, queen conch, and many others. The Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary uses marine zoning as its main management strategy. Marine zoning is a conservation strategy that sections off areas into different zones based off of the importance and level of damage of each section. So the sanctuary has created 5 different zones and that each section can be assigned to. These zones are ecological reserves, sanctuary preservation areas, wildlife management areas, existing management areas, and special use areas. So this is a map that shows where these zones are located. The yellow area is a national wildlife refuge that is separate from the marine sanctuary, but the marine sanctuary and the wildlife refuge co-manage the coast because it affects both the marine sanctuary and the wildlife refuge. So the wildlife refuge areas, it's not the entire yellow area, but it's kind of dots along the coastline. So each zone has different prohibited activities which are specialized based off of the needs of that zone. And this helps to allow for the continued use of the sanctuary by humans, as well as the continued protection of the ecosystem. The largest zone is the ecological reserve, which is seen in pink. And these zones are large continuous habitats that are important for marine life, and especially for coral life. Activities that are not allowed in this zone are fishing, touching live or dead coral, anchoring on coral, and discharging any matter except cooling water and engine exhaust. These limitations are specific to that zone in order to ensure the areas that need extra protection get it. Marine zoning is a really good management strategy for habitat prevention in an area that has varying conservation needs. This marine sanctuary and other protected sites like it provide vital habitat to species that are at risk and who risk extinction due to habitat loss. So these are my works cited, and that is all. Thank you.